Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide, where I have a very special episode for you folks today. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, I haven't even cleared up some of the stuff that we did in the last episode of the museum because I have been laser focused on a task that has actually taken me about 4 months worth of my time on and off behind the scenes on my Twitch live streams that happened every Tuesday, Thursday and Sunday. I have been basically just dedicating those to ancient debris mining because I wanted to get myself a Netherite Beacon in this series. A full tier 4 beacon composed entirely out of Netherite blocks. And I am happy to say that as of the live stream that happened this Tuesday, at the time of this recording, we have done it. I have 164 blocks of netherite, which is the exact amount we need to make the 4-tier full beacon. I even have a little bit left over here, but all of these have been mined live on stream on Twitch with a bunch of people watching. And like I said, that process has taken me about 4 months. I've been doing it since early July, and now here in early November, we finally have enough to compose a full netherite beacon. And I wanted to show you guys a little bit of the process that has gone into that because it has been kind of a mammoth task. It's been a really long process, but quite a rewarding one. Having said that, the reason I wanted to do the netherite beacon in the first place is to explain to you folks that there's actually no reward at all for doing it. And that might seem like a really strange concept. So we'll go back to the beginning and we'll take a look at exactly what is needed to get hold of this much ancient debris. Now, before we get too deep into this episode, I want to let people know that at no point in this process have I been considering this as a competition. My goal has never been to do this first, it's never been to do this the fastest, it's never been to do this in the most efficient way. I just wanted to do it for the sake of having this episode be part of the Minecraft Survival Guide and explain to you a bit of the process of gathering a netherite beacon if you're interested in doing that in your own world. But since starting this project, and especially recently as a few more people have been able to cross this milestone themselves and get themselves their own netherite beacon, people have let me know that so-and-so did it first, or so-and-so did it a certain way, or so-and-so is also doing this, and that's awesome. It's always really cool to see other people trying these types of challenges, but please don't ever think that I meant to be the first person to do this, or that somebody beat me as a result of getting it done before this episode came out or before the stream where I finished my own beacon. And I wouldn't normally put something like this in an episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide, but I'm only saying this because people assume there is some sort of competition going on here and that for whatever reason, when it's been done, it's worth less. Personally, this is worth so much to me just be able to make this episode for you, and I think it's really cool that other people have been attempting the same thing. I expect even before you heard about people starting to finish netherite beacons in personal worlds, people with a little bit more time to invest or a little bit more discipline, or who had resources stockpiled beforehand or something like that, have probably completed netherite beacons before the update was even out. Probably even in the snapshots people have done this. So even if you've already seen other people do that before, that's not the point of this episode. The point of this is to show you how I did it, and for me to share a few tips for people who would like to do it themselves. First of all, we have the mathematical side. Each netherite ingot requires 4 pieces of netherite scrap to be combined to make a netherite ingot. And of course, you need 9 netherite ingots to make a full block. So a block of netherite is actually going to be comprised of 36 ancient debris smelted down into netherite scrap. And that turns out to be quite a lot of ancient debris if you want 164 blocks. The mathematics I was using was 4 times 9 times 164 led to 5,904 ancient debris. And so on my live streams, whenever I've been counting everything off, I've always been counting up to a total of 5,904, and that's what's gone into these blocks of netherite here. But of course, netherite scrap is not the only material you require to make netherite. You will also need some gold. If I search for it in here, netherite ingots also require 4 ingots of gold, and that is why I've also spent a whole lot of time over here at my gold farm. And people in some videos recently might have noticed that I have quite a high number of levels. It's because I've been spending time AFK in order to get some gold. I've also been spending a lot of time up here repairing my tools because of the mining process for ancient debris taking so long. So it's kind of a nice opportunity to come back here and both generate some gold and also repair my tools, which is why I've been using the gold farm a lot compared to other, perhaps more beneficial XP farms like the Enderman farm. The gold farm collects both gold ingots and gold nuggets. Not only that, but the blast furnaces over here smelt down golden swords into more golden nuggets that can be combined back into ingots so that we can combine them with the netherite scrap. And so getting hold of the gold with this kind of infrastructure in place was actually fairly simple. The complicated part, of course, was getting hold of that much ancient debris. And now we need to start talking about the logistics. Luckily, where I am right here, I'm in a single-player world. The Minecraft Survival Guide has always been my world and my world alone, and so I don't have to worry too much about what other people would worry about me doing with the terrain. On a multiplayer server, you might designate a specific ancient debris mining area in the world so that, you know, the central section of the nether doesn't get too torn apart by people looking for ancient debris. But in my case, I didn't have to worry about that at all. What I did have to worry about was the fact that this central section of the nether here was generated previous to 1.16. In fact, a lot of this has been generated as far back as 1.13, the update Aquatic, when we first started this world. And while I have trimmed down the chunks of the nether for 1.16 to make sure I could access some of the new nether terrain nice and easily, it does mean a significant journey in each direction if I want to get hold of some of that new terrain. But effectively, as soon as I end up finding new terrain, I can start mining for netherite. And that is where my first netherite mine came in. You may remember back at the start of this update, I was mining out whole chunks in order to get hold of the single pieces of netherite sometimes that they contained, and my mining methods have evolved quite a bit since then. Obviously, we needed to go out and find new terrain in order to get hold of the netherite, but taking down this many blocks just to find 1 or 2 blocks within them, and sometimes rarely finding nothing at all, it was going to wear through my tools quite quickly. Even digging out these 2x2 tunnels over here kind of proved a little bit pointless, because ultimately, even if we ran into 1 or 2 debris, it was just going to take a super long time to dig out a tunnel of that size. So while this area was where I got my first ancient debris, and probably accounts for some of the ancient debris that I still have in this netherite box, we had to evolve the way we thought about this, and that's why I started doing a little bit of testing. You might remember this area here from where we started an ancient debris mining project a little while ago. This was actually the area I set up for my initial tests of which methods would prove the most lucrative, digging long 2x2 tunnels out here and blasting out the area with other resources like beds, TNT, and I started with end crystals and then I decided against it. But this eventually expanded into a larger ancient debris mining project thanks to a little bit of TNT farming. I did work with beds for a little while, but I decided that the bed method was just a little bit too volatile for me. It meant exploding stuff up close. You didn't have a chain reaction that you could set off in safety like you could with TNT, and ultimately the only time I have died during the course of this project was when a bed blew up a block underneath me, I fell into lava, and I was able to escape the lava, but I still died while I was on fire in a nearby tunnel. Was able to recover all of my tools and armor, and most of it is netherite anyway, so I wasn't worried about it burning. But even so, it felt like the bed method was just a little bit too volatile for my liking, and so instead I decided to stick with TNT and start farming it in a serious way. So to give you an example of exactly what the process has been for mining ancient debris for the past 4 months or so, I'm going to come down to my most recent ancient debris mine. I think this was the 7th or 8th outpost that I dug out, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in a second, but we're coming down here to Y12. Now, you will probably know, if you've seen previous episodes or been on the Minecraft wiki, that the process of mining ancient debris usually yields the best results when you are mining at Y15, or at least if you are mining manually at Y15, that is typically the height at which you will find the most chance for ancient debris generating. But I decided to change that up a little bit for this mining technique because, of course, we're using TNT to blast out areas of the nether underneath lava lakes a lot of the time. And what I found was that if I put the TNT at Y15 and sort of guaranteed that I was going to blow up the area in a radius around Y15, I found a lot more lava came in through the ceiling. And so ducking that down by a couple of blocks to Y12 or Y13 was enough to get me out of sticky situations with lava pouring in through the ceiling all the time. Although, as you can see, it still happens quite a bit thanks to the way the nether generates anyway. And I wanted to make sure that I spaced out these tunnels by a certain amount each time. And so what I did was I pressed F3 and B and tried to find the chunk borders. Now, people will sometimes mine along chunk borders because there is a chance of veins overlapping across chunk borders. Personally, the only reason I did this was so that I could space these tunnels out 16 blocks at a time, because that only left a wall of a couple of blocks in between each of these tunnels once they had been exploded outwards, meaning that we would miss as few debris blocks as possible between them. And we're going to start a brand new tunnel out here, even though I don't even technically need any more ancient debris at this point. I would still like to get a bit more for decorative purposes, and it's a good way of explaining, thanks to a little bit of help from the replay mod, how exactly these tunnels work. You know what, I'll go a little bit further down. We'll do a whole separate tunnel over here so that I can show you a little bit of that kind of spectator mode camera view from the outside. I'm going to open up a shulker box here that I brought with a little bit of TNT, and I've also brought a shulker box of fire resistance potions with some backup TNT in there as well. And I would always bring fire resistance potions when I came down here mining, because the Java edition of Minecraft, this doesn't happen as much in the Bedrock edition, but the Java edition generates a lot of these kind of ravine-like structures underneath the surface which contain pockets of lava like this. And for the most part, I would try and fill them in from a distance where I could, using a little bit of netherrack that I'd gathered from the surrounding landscape in order to patch up these holes, but I would still need to do that pretty frequently, and some of these were unavoidably large to the extent where I'd have to drink a fire resistance potion in order to even make any progress through them. And so the process of digging a long 1 block wide tunnel begins, and this is the tunnel we're going to be placing all of our TNT in, so I want to make sure that it's relatively long. And the only reasons I stop a tunnel is because I feel like it's reached an adequate length to the point where it becomes a little bit difficult to travel back from it, or we hit a basalt delta. And basalt deltas are, of course, a little bit more blast proof thanks to the composition of basalt and blackstone having higher blast resistance than netherrack. So once we hit a basalt delta in one of these tunnels, it was just going to be difficult at that point to get any further through it. But as you can see, even digging this tunnel at Y12 below the recommended height for mining ancient debris by hand, I'm still finding a couple of veins of ancient debris here and there as I dig my way through the tunnel. After a while, I found the fire animation really started to get on my nerves. It covers about half of the screen at its height and could often mean that I missed some ancient debris as I was going through the tunnels themselves. So to counter that, what I did was install the resource pack from Vanilla Tweaks that lowers the height of the fire animation. I believe it's just called Unobtrusive Fire, but I will have to take a look at that and try and link it to you guys in the description, because it was really helpful considering how often I had to step into lava to deal with obstacles on this tunnel. Either way, I'll find the right name for it and make sure it is linked in the video description, because it was actually a lot nicer not having the fire animation take up half of the screen whilst I was digging out one of these tunnels. Now, sooner or later, I would run into something that would cause me to stop the tunnel, which was typically one of three things. It was either a basalt delta, which, as I mentioned, have a higher blast resistance, so it was just a waste of TNT to continue through them into whatever terrain was next. A lava pocket that I didn't feel like dealing with, maybe if I had run out of fire resistance potions or was just keeping an eye on my supply, or alternatively, a kind of arbitrary end limit to tunnels, because sometimes I would just be going for blocks and blocks and blocks and I wouldn't want to go too much further because it would just take a long journey traveling there and back. And at that point I would take out the TNT and start laying it down 1 or 2 blocks apart. And I wasn't being too precise about this, and I think TNT could carry a chain reaction if it was up to 3 or even 4 blocks apart, but what I really wanted was a pretty comprehensive blasted out area. I wanted to make sure that all of the area around here, if it was going to be exploded, was exploded nice and evenly so we could see as much debris as possible in the remaining tunnel. Of course, the longer the tunnel, the more TNT would need, so it was important to bring a shulker box or 2 of TNT with me, and I would have to frequently dip into the shulker box, swap out some of the resources that I had already acquired from digging out the tunnel for more stacks of TNT, and keep placing them as we went down the line. But eventually we'd return to the start of the tunnel, light the TNT with a flame bow, and the chain reaction would begin. Inevitably, at this point, we got some lava coming in from the roof because there would always be lava pockets, individual lava sources, or larger lava ravine kind of pockets that were concealed inside the walls of Netherrack here. And so that was where it became crucial to have a decent supply of fire resistance potions. So all we needed to do was hop in, make our way through the lava as carefully as we needed to, and even dispose of some of the lava sources if it was really necessary to. But what I ended up doing a lot of the time was ignoring the lava, and that really made the process a little bit faster. Despite the fact that inevitably somewhere down the line there'd be some ancient debris hiding behind lava that would be concealed by a lava fall and that I'd be missing if I skipped over it, it was just going to be a faster process to not have to look behind every single lava fall in order to look for ancient debris. If there wasn't any there, I'd just be wasting my time. So I decided to look only for exposed debris and ignore basically everything else. At that point, my task simply became to go around and collect up all of the ancient debris I could find in the exposed tunnel, and sometimes I might end up missing a few if they were tucked away into cavities in the ceiling, or occasionally I'd get faked out by soul sand or quartz and assume there was some debris there where there wasn't. Once or twice I might encounter the occasional hostile mob that had managed to spawn in the tunnel in front of me, but what I ended up with was a decent haul of ancient debris every time. There were, of course, moments when it felt like the supply of ancient debris was drying up completely, thanks to the fact that ancient debris only spawns in veins of between 1 and 3. The world generation just wasn't giving us a great deal of ancient debris, and sometimes we would have found the only vein that generated in that chunk while we were digging the tunnel itself. So sometimes 4 or 5 or even 6 chunks would go by, and it felt like we just hadn't made any progress towards the goal at all. We can chalk that up to some of the debris being behind lava, or maybe even generating in the wall between our tunnels, but eventually the drought would end and we'd stumble upon 3 or 4 veins of ancient debris within eyeshot of each other, ready to be collected. The entire time I was doing this on stream, I was tracking the entire thing using a hotkey auto counter, which would basically update a text file in the background that was linked into my stream software and would allow an on-screen counter to update. But if you're doing this yourself, all you really need to do is be organized about it. Keep a tally, even a written one if you just want to scratch off numbers on a page every time you get an additional vein of ancient debris. You might even want to do it automatically through some sort of counter. You can keep track of it via the Minecraft statistics page, or you can just keep 100 at a time in your inventory, transfer it to a shulker box every time you reach the next 100, and that way you can guarantee that your progress will be counted up as you go. One of the most important things to remember is that this is not about getting every piece of ancient debris within an area. It's just about getting enough to satisfy you. The Nether will have a near infinite supply of ancient debris while there is still undiscovered terrain, and you don't need to worry about getting every single piece from every single chunk in the surrounding area. It might be more efficient to do so, but it is going to save you a lot of time if you just go for the stuff you can see and accept that somewhere there is a piece of ancient debris you were never able to get. Eventually, though, I would reach the end of my tunnel, whether it was the basalt delta or just the arbitrary point at which I had decided to stop, and as long as I had enough fire resistance potions or enough lingering effects, I could fly my way back to the start of the tunnel using fireworks. Despite the fact that lava would occasionally slow me down as I flew through it, the tunnel was easy enough to traverse using fireworks, and it was just the quickest way of returning back to our starting point and getting on with the next tunnel. So at this point you might be asking where exactly I get all of this TNT from, and surely it's easier and cheaper to use wool to make beds, and wood is easily farmable, that kind of stuff. Well, in my experience, I'm finding that TNT is actually relatively easy to farm. It just takes a little bit of time, which farming wool like this for beds would as well, and ultimately I think you're going to get more TNT in stackable forms out there in the first place. So, the first step is, of course, to acquire a lot of gunpowder, and I do that all thanks to my hostile mob farm that we built in an early episode of the 116 portion of this series. It's a multi-platform mob spawner in the sky, powered by soul sand campfires as a killing mechanism that actually produces a pretty large amount of gunpowder. All 4 of those sets of platforms will produce creepers, and one of them I actually ended up putting trapdoors in so it only produces creepers and spiders. So we should get a little bit more gunpowder on balance from that. Maybe it would help to balance out the rest of the platforms with trapdoors as well, but ultimately I wanted some of the bones, the string, the other drops as well so that I could trade them with villagers and so on and so forth. So getting gunpowder is easy. All it takes is AFK time, which I have plenty of time to do. I can put my computer on overnight. I can just leave it in the background while I'm doing other things around the house. It's totally fine getting gunpowder this way. Gunpowder is not the problem. The problem is, of course, sand, the other component in the TNT crafting recipe. Each block of TNT needs 4 sand and 5 gunpowder, so you need to get sand in pretty large quantities if you want to make this amount of TNT. And so I selected a desert biome a little bit further out in my world. It's actually the one that we saw me get the husk from when I was collecting all of the zombie variants for a recent episode over at the museum. This desert is not really all that far from the museum. It's kind of out in the I think the northeast corner of my world. And if I go through this shattered savanna biome over here, you will see the desert come into view. And this desert has been absolutely torn to pieces over the last 4 months. If I get up into the sky here and take a look down, you'll be able to see a little bit more of the desolation of this desert. It's really been torn to shreds. And most of the time when it looks like there is sand on the surface, that is now actually sandstone. Of course, there are some small patches of sand here and there, and I tried to go through this as systematically as I could every single time I visited, so there might be some kind of sheer walls of sand here and there, but sometimes those patches just didn't really feel like enough to be worth mining in the first place, so I decided to leave them alone. Effectively, every time I came to the desert, I would try and fill up at least 4 shulker boxes of sand, preferably 8, and at the maximum I'd get a couple more extra just if I wanted to stockpile sand for other things. But of course, if you fill up a shulker box entirely with sand, that's going to be 1/4 of the amount you would need for a full shulker box of TNT. 4 shulker boxes of sand and 5 shulker boxes or single chests of gunpowder are going to get you basically a full shulker box of TNT, and that's the calculation I was working with every single time. So 2 double chests plus half a chest extra of gunpowder from my hostile mob farm was going to get me a full shulker box of TNT, basically. So every time I came to the desert, I would try and come back with at least 4 shulker boxes of sand. And amazingly, pretty much all of the sand that I've used for this project has come from this single desert biome, and I haven't even touched some of the desert space over here, or some of the islands that we flew over on the way that are kind of heavily desertified, populated by sand blocks pretty much exclusively. I actually pulled so much sand out of this desert, and yet it still keeps on giving. There are usually 4 or 5 layers of sand before you get to anything else under the surface, and in the process, I've actually managed to uncover some really interesting artifacts of world generation, like how the stone forms around this lava pool is actually kind of interesting to me. But anyway, I want to show you my statistics screen, in case anybody is thinking that I've been spawning TNT in off camera or something like that. Sand is actually now the second most mined block in this world, above stone, which is wild, because if you consider I've had this world around for like 2.5 years at this point, I have mined more sand than I have stone just in the last little while, getting to the amount of TNT that I needed. That statistic has only been eclipsed by the amount of netherrack I've had to mine in order to dig the tunnels to lay all of that TNT out and get this process done to begin with. So 397,000 sand. I guess I would assume I had mined about 5,000 or so before that, maybe a little bit more, maybe kind of closer up with some of the stuff we've got around here, like the terracotta and the andesite kind of numbers, maybe 25,000. So I would estimate probably about 375,000 sand total might have gone into this project. Also, if you look at the amount of TNT I have now crafted, 82,941. And again, I would estimate that I hadn't made more than 1,000 TNT before I started this project, so I have made 80,000 TNT over the course of the last 4 months, all going into the project for this Netherite Beacon. And people may be wondering why I wrecked a desert in this world instead of using some sort of sand duplication machine, because those do exist. I think they use the end portal in order to push sand through into another dimension while glitching it to remain in the overworld, and I honestly think that it makes more sense to show the sheer amount of effort that had to go into this project through something like this, through the absolute decimation of a desert biome. I feel like it kind of makes sense to show this. And yes, it does mean that an aspect of my world looks a little bit less pretty than it did before, but realistically, the world is infinite, or near enough infinite. It is huge. And I think even though this desert is relatively close to the museum, it's really not close enough that I would actually want to build anything here, and so it makes sense to actually use the natural resources of the world for this project. And in the end, I ended up kind of overshooting the amount of TNT that I needed. I was stockpiling a bunch of TNT for the last stages of this project just to make sure that I would have enough and that I didn't end up needing to craft more TNT during the live stream where I was planning on getting the last 404 ancient debris in one go. But back here at Founders Forge, I'm going to grab the Netherite shulker box and we're going to head back over to the museum to wrap up this episode. And so to finish up, I want to build the beacon on camera, and I want to talk a little bit about why exactly I've done this in the first place and exactly what it means for the game, and whether or not there are any special effects that you get from having a Netherite beacon, because I'm fairly certain that's something people are going to be curious about. And it's funny how many of my recent projects actually went into the creation of this beacon, because the Wither skeleton farm that I built in a fairly recent episode was actually all about getting hold of not Wither skeleton skulls, but coal, because I wanted to make sure I had enough fuel on hand and that I was going to be able to smelt all of the ancient debris, because 5,904 debris requires a lot of fuel, and while I was, of course, smelting it as I went, I got a little bit worried that I was going to run out of coal and have to go mining for it, and I thought, how about with a skeleton farm instead? And when I built this tier 4 beacon on the stream, I actually made it too wide. The reason I'm building it over here behind the back of the museum right now is that I plan on taking it down again and moving it somewhere else, and I wanted it to be close to another beacon so that I could have the haste effect, because netherite blocks actually take longer to mine than any other kind of resource block. You saw how long that took to mine with haste. Imagine that without haste, and then imagine having to take down 164 blocks that way. But here it is, the full Netherite beacon. You've seen it. It's not hollow. It's completely full of blocks of netherite. We even have a little bit more netherite left over in that shulker box that I acquired before I started the challenge. We can even now activate this beacon with a netherite ingot, and while this might be a waste for it to go away permanently, I think it's worth it just for the flex, to be honest. We're going to give ourselves, let's say, resistance and regeneration on the beacon, and we're going to call it done. And there we go. We have these two beacons side by side, and as you will see, there is no difference in terms of the powers that you can get from the beacon. The effects are always going to be the same, and in fact, to prove that we are not going to get any additional benefits from this, I'm also going to go out 50 blocks in that direction away from this beacon. I'm going to quickly take the coordinates and check where I'm going. Okay, 814. So yeah, I need to walk about 50 blocks in this direction, and then the effects of the regen and resistance will start to wear off, proving that the netherite beacon doesn't have a wider radius either. There we go, at negative 750 we are well outside of the radius, and as you can see, resistance and regen effects wearing down. The haste beacon just wore off as well, and we don't get any additional benefits in that sense from the netherite beacon either. The netherite beacon is effectively pointless, and this is something that I really wanted to bring up as part of this episode, because the reason I've done this is because you can, not because you should. I honestly think that it's not worth tying any kind of benefits to the player building a netherite beacon in the game. It's fun if you want to do it, and the same goes for a diamond beacon or even an emerald beacon if you find emeralds particularly difficult to find, if you don't like villager trading, and so forth. But of course, gold and iron are always going to be the most farmable of the materials, give or take how you feel about villagers, and netherite and diamond are going to be much more difficult. Diamond is actually relatively trivial compared to netherite at this point, but the point still stands. So why would you want to do this in the first place? Well, you probably shouldn't, to be honest. This has taken me, as I've said several times throughout this episode, 4 months of effort, 3 days a week streams, 3 to 4 hours each time. I would estimate that that's over 100 hours worth of work has gone into producing this pyramid, which honestly, an iron one would have done the same thing, and I could have just used iron blocks I already have or make a new iron farm and very easily get that many. There was also a rumor going around for a while that making a netherite beacon was actually an achievement or an advancement, and I think that may have been because somebody made a custom advancement for it in their own advancement data pack. But trust me when I say that nothing happened when I built this beacon. I've also tested it in a creative mode test world where the achievements would pop up even though it's in creative mode, because this is Java edition and advancements are per world, not kind of tied to a central account like they are on the Xbox editions or whatever. And the same is true of both Java and Bedrock. There is no achievement or advancement for getting a netherite beacon. And once again, I think that's probably a good thing, because very few people, if any, are going to have enough time to do this, really. It's really not the kind of thing that you could expect the casual Minecraft player to do. It's not even really on the level of the kind of challenges that you find some of these other advancements set up as. They're meant to be fun ways of exploring the game, whereas this was a 4-month slog for me and 100 hours worth of work. So I I honestly don't think there should be an advancement for making a Netherite Beacon. It just seems like too much work to put in for a single reward. And before we wrap up this episode and before I take down the beacon for good, I want to ask you, what do you think I should do with it? Because I've had a lot of answers from that. A lot of people have been saying, is the beacon going to go into the museum? Are we going to create some sort of special pedestal for it or something like that? I would like to know your thoughts, so let me know down in the comments what you think we should do with the Netherite Beacon, because to be honest, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not certain I want it to be in the museum. I kind of want to break apart the blocks of Netherite and use them for decoration somewhere, maybe keep the first tier of the beacon and use it for something else, but maybe, just maybe, we'll put it up as a full tier 4 beacon in the museum, as an example of some of the other beacon effects you can get or something like that. We will see. But let's get back to the point of building a Netherite beacon. The point is just for fun, for the challenge of it, for the sake of doing something that is possible in Minecraft. And that's kind of where we're going with the survival guide these days. I know that a lot of people have wondered about the status of the survival guide and how there doesn't really seem to be a whole lot left to teach that doesn't get into the heavily technical side of things. And that's kind of where I'm at. I like showing you guys what is possible in Minecraft. Not necessarily what you should do, what is necessary for survival, but what is possible and what can be a fun challenge for you to take on yourself. So I hope you appreciate that, and I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. That's going to be it from me for today. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this episode if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.